Well, I'm going to talk about how you might use role-playing as a method for teaching. And I've used role-playing as a part of my practice for several educational projects of varying scale. In fact, role-playing lessons have become a regular ingredient in the curriculum of the school where I work. Just to be clear, when I'm talking about role-playing, I don't mean lessons on how to role-play. I mean, what I'm talking about is using role-playing as a method or a tool. But actually, I think I should start out by talking about why teachers need role-playing as a method, because we do. And I have to go back to a different question. Why do we send children to school? There's a number of reasons, obviously. To learn, of course. We want our children to be able to fulfill their own potentials so that they may grow up and become successful adults. And then the question is, how are you successful? How do you go about that? Well, you need to feel fulfilled, first of all. You need a job so that you can bring bread home, and you need social skills so that you can interact with people and become friends and establish both the casual relationships that you need to get along, but also the close ones. So what schools need to do is they need to socialize children. They need to teach them both the basic facts of life and the skills that enable us to do stuff like read and write and whatnot. However, there's a problem with the way that we teach at the moment. Actually, there are several problems. I'm going to go through them. The overall one is not so much what we teach as it is how we teach. If you step into an average classroom in any part of the Western world, actually in any part of the world, you'll find there will be about 20 to 30 children, and they'll be sitting by little tables distributed around in the classroom, and at one end of the classroom there'll be a teacher, and that teacher will be doing most of the talking. And the children will be putting up their little hands to ask a question or ask for clarification sometimes. But mainly it's the teacher who will be doing the talking, and the children will be taught one subject at a time, typically stuff like maths and language and literature, chemistry, physics. The main problem with this type of teaching is it's obsolete. It belongs in a world where knowledge is absolute, where bosses should be feared and obeyed, and where you're allowed to beat children into submission. In the present, we actually want our children to think for themselves. We want them to question authorities, and we don't want to beat them anymore. So, let me talk you through some of the problems with traditional teaching, one by one. First of all, timetables. Dividing the day into lessons that are devoted to subjects might be convenient in the sense that it's easy to command. However, the real world seldom dishes out nice structured assignments like the ones you get at school. And then about the subjects. How about all those skills you need in the real world that don't fit into a traditional school subject? How about things like speaking up for yourself or taking action? Where do they go? Motivation. Motivation is the biggest challenge of the modern teacher. That's my claim anyway. I think it's true. You can motivate pupils by you can't motivate them by beating them anymore. Actually. So you need to find a different way of doing it, unfortunately. That's a problem. Being passive. There's a major fault with teaching children to be passive listeners. Anyone who has lived in the world long enough will know that it's not the quiet, polite ones that get what they want. Schools need to be able to transcend its own context in order for it to be effective. That is to say, a school needs to be a place where you can practice real-world skills, not just school skills. My favorite example is ninth graders learning to do an equation. And they can do it fine on the blackboard, but once they get into the real world and all of a sudden they have to figure out a recipe, or I don't know what you'd use an equation for. Actually, I'm a good example of this. They don't know what to use this knowledge for, and that kind of makes it irrelevant, I think. Well, here's a preposterous claim. Role-playing can be a solution. No, it's not the cure-all of every problem with modern education. Lord knows. What I mean to say is role-playing as an educational tool in the hands of a competent teacher is a solution. And I'll tell you why. If you go back to my 5 points, why traditional teaching is not ideal. Role-playing is a way of organizing education in such a way that subjects are integrated. It's possible to teach competencies such as action taking and voicing your opinion, which is very difficult to fit into a normal subject. It can be very motivating because of the playful manner in which it's usually conducted. Pupils are active, not passive. The focus of attention is on each pupil and not on the teacher. It's distributed. It's much more even. And while a school is a school, the role-playing scenario enables the teacher and the pupils to pretend they're outside in the real world. So you can kind of short-circuit the whole situation. Okay, so far so good. But how's it done? I'm afraid I can't tell you. I don't have the words to formulate a general instruction of how you use role-playing for educational purposes. What I do have is experience, so that's what I'm going to talk about now. In the spring of 2010, my colleagues and I put together what has so far been our most successful lesson plan. We wanted to boost our pupils' interest in science, and so we decided to send them on a mission in space. The story went like this. In year 2200, a megacorp launched a plan for colonization. A fleet of spaceships was to be sent into space in order to explore the possibility of colonizing other planets. The fleet was directed by a supercomputer called Mother. The scenario was organized in such a way that the crews on the individual spaceships had to solve relevant assignments in order to advance through the different stages of spacefaring. The teachers were dressed up as androids with tin foil hats and plastic aprons. We looked pretty neat, I think. And we functioned as assistants and coaches to the different crews. And we were sort of manifestations of the supercomputer. However, one of the teachers started to improvise a malfunction in his programming. This made the pupils conclude that there was something wrong with the supercomputer, and eventually they rebelled against it and shut it down. And instead, they formed a senate and instated democracy for the entire fleet. Which is excellent. We felt completely helpless as teachers. But what has happened was that the children had learned much more than just physics and science. I find it really interesting that the scenario made room for teaching such a thing as action taking and invoking your right to freedom of speech and democracy. It was the pupils themselves that did it. It wasn't a story that we had told them. They were there, first row, actually experiencing and doing things. So, role-playing as a teaching method presents a much needed alternative to traditional education, and it works. I know because there are a lot of people doing it by now. If you're a teacher and you're watching this, I hope this has made you curious enough to try it out. Anyway, thanks for listening.